Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Ben, welcome back to you. How are you?
Well, mate, I'm a happier man because common sense has prevailed, Bryce. Common sense has prevailed.
Do tell, Ben, do tell.
Well, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to tell, bro. Of course, last week we were really concerned about what happened in Queensland in regards to their COVID-19 tenancy and landlord relief package that was announced or proposed by the Palaszczuk government in Queensland. They listened, which was great. So from that point of view, we're not going to give all the details away because we're going to bring Antonia back in a podcast, hopefully in the next day or so.
Couple of days, yeah.
Perfect, right? So, but what we do want to let you know is definitely it's a more balanced, well thought out position, which also doesn't mean that the landlord's going to be exposed financially. So I think it's a bit more of a win-win as opposed to a win-loss, which was their original policy proposal. So congratulations to all of those people who helped out, and we'll take 15 minutes of Antonia's time and take a deeper dive into what that really means in a coming episode in the next 24 to 48 hours. So stay tuned for that, everyone.
Yeah, well said, Ben. So we're also continuing our themes of the presidents, Ben. We've got another president on today, which we're super excited about. But before we get there, my Mindset Minute theme is a Zig Ziglar quote, Ben. You know I love Zig Ziglar. So he says the lack of direction, not lack of time, is the problem. We all have 24-hour days. So I thought that might be a good one to land at this time, Ben, because clearly everyone's in lockdown, they're in isolation, but we're all in lockdown and we're all in isolation. We've all got the same amount of time, and yet some people are really thriving in feeding their mind full of good stuff, Ben.
Yes,
and
love it.
Unfortunately, some people are feeding themselves full of lots of scrolling, social media feeds, and if you're and if you're consuming too much of a diet around news, it's not good for you. So it's a lack of direction, not a lack of time. That's the problem. We all have 24-hour days. Ben, and I've actually got a tie into that for my life hack a little bit later. But as we sort of hinted, Ben, a very, very exciting conversation today with the president of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. Let's cut to the interview that we had with Leanne Pilkington. Ben, we have a very special guest today. We have Leanne Pilkington, who is the president of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. Welcome to the Property Couch, Leanne.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're excited. You're one of the most respected and sought-after commentators in the industry. You've been in the industry for nearly 3 decades.
No, nearly 4, actually.
Nearly 4.
Don't tell anybody.
I'm just quoting your website.
Yeah, no, well, it hasn't been updated for a while, right?
Yeah, about a decade.
I used to joke and tell people that I started when I was 12, but the reality is that still makes me old, so it just doesn't matter, right?
Well, the thing is, you've got lots of wisdom and lots of experience.
Yeah.
We're excited to tap into today. But you're not just the president of the Real Estate Institute. You've also got a very successful business. You're the managing director of a boutique real estate group called Laing+Simmons. So we want to dive into a lot of stuff with you today. But before we do, we want to take you back to the beginning, and we want to find out a little bit about you and what was the pathway to being the president of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales? How did you get into property in the first place?
Well, my father owned 3 real estate businesses in the Hills District. So I actually literally did start answering the phone as a 12-year-old, working for him on a Sunday. And then when I left high school, my intention was to become a school teacher. I went away to schoolies. Yes, they did have schoolies back then. And I ran out of money. So I rang Dad and said, can you send me some money? And he said, sure, so long as you come and work for me until you go to uni. And so that was back in the beginning of 1981. And I started working for him, and I left him 8 years later. In that time, I studied to become a valuer, but I also started as a property manager and then was in sales for a number of years.
Wow. So tell us about the first day on the job with your dad. What were you doing?
Oh God, whatever he told me, which I struggled with. Dad used to actually fire me. So in those days, we worked 7 days a week. That was just the reality of the business. And so I was working 7 days a week. I was studying 3 nights a week, and I was driving from the Hills district into the city to do my valuation course. And that in those days there was no M2. It was a terrible trip. So that was just what I did, right? I was a pretty determined kind of teenager, and but Dad and I used to fight like cat and dog, and he literally used to fire me every Friday at about lunchtime. And so a few months in, I just said to Dad, you know what? I'm just going to take Friday afternoons off because I think that's just best for everybody. And so he still jokes now and says, you know, firing you every week was one of the best things I ever did. Good on you, Dad.
Yeah, baptism of fire. Hey,
yeah, totally.
Now, clearly, there's some amazing real estate agents, women real estate agents now. Who some of them are at the very peak of the game. But I dare say back then it was a bit of a boys' club. What was it like being a part of that boys' club?
Well, my mum was also a real estate agent, so it was just mum and I in the Hills District. There was only the 2 of us, and the competitors used to say, "Oh, you're talking to Leanne. Oh, she's a pretty little thing," and so that was the typical line. But the thing was, I was a qualified valuer, and none of those boys had the determination and tenacity to actually study for 4 years to do that. And so I could just demonstrate pretty quickly that, yeah, whilst I was a pretty little thing, I was pretty smart and pretty determined and pretty focused as well. So I've been involved in the boys' club all of my working career. Even, you know, when I first started running Laing+Simmons, some of the other franchisors would try and go over my head to the board, for example, and the board thankfully was very clear on the fact, no, Leanne runs this business, so you need to talk to Leanne. So obviously I don't have that problem now, but it's taken a long time, really has taken a long time.
What would you say to some of the women who are trying to aspire to the success that you've had, that having to navigate some of that path that you've already trod before? What's some of the takeaways that you've observed in that time and that served you well, that might help others who are listening who might find themselves in the same position?
I've always had people around me who have more faith in my ability than I've actually had in my own ability. And so I think a lot of us are in that situation. And I think, you know, that you often get asked, what would you tell your younger self? And for me, it's like, you are capable of so much more than you ever realise. You know, I never saw myself here. I really didn't. But I had some people around me who I had a lot of belief in, and I had a lot of faith in, and they believed in me. And I thought, you know what, I trust their judgment. So then I need to see in myself what they see in me. Does that make sense?
It does, because it's an important message that you're sharing there, Leanne, because the research does indicate that right across the spectrum in the workforce, that women underestimate their abilities, and they've got lower self-confidence in themselves, whereas typically men always overestimate their abilities, and that leads to obviously overconfidence as well. So if that is a message in terms of all of the women listening to this, that you probably are better than you think you are, and your conservative nature may be holding you back, and you're testament to that, because you've got to the peak of your industry, not only as the president, but also running a very successful boutique agency. I think that's an enormous credit to you.
Yeah, thank you.
So well done. In terms of, I want to spend a little moment in terms of, irrespective of sex, what makes for a
Would you please? I get sort of forced into that women's corner, but the reality, and all the time, and it was something, I have to be honest, I avoided for a really long time. I wouldn't go to women's events, I wouldn't go to women's networking, I wouldn't go to women in real estate conferences. I avoided it, and it was a very clear decision for me. And then all of a sudden, I'm now I've now got a networking group called Real Women in Real Estate, and I'm everywhere I go. I talk. It's women's stuff I talk about.
Yeah.
And
which empowers them, because now
yeah,
you're at a stage
exactly.
where you realise that you can pay it forward, right? That
Yep.
that those women who need that opportunity, but yeah, irrespective of sex.
Yep.
What does make for a great selling agent? And then the second question, what does make for a great property manager in your view? Like, what are the skill sets you're looking for in those people, in terms of the work that they do and how they thrive in what is a very competitive market?
Yeah, and obviously very different skill sets, right?
Yeah.
So from a selling agent, you need absolute focus. The number one salesperson in the Laing+Simmons network is a woman, Delene Lewis. And one of the things with Delene is that she is ruthless with her time management. She knows exactly what she needs to get done in a day, and she's very, very clear. And that is what she learned from Bart Doff, who she worked for a long time. And so definitely that focus on what's important, the focus on the dollar productive stuff, and the focus on doing what, real estate, it's not rocket science. We all know what needs to be done, but a lot of agents spend a lot of time telling us why they can't do those things that need to be done.
And so let's stay on the selling agent, and we'll move on to the property manager. From a buyer's point of view, because obviously, we're the public, our podcast is for the general public. What's the best way that a budding buyer can get the best value out of the vendor selling agent, considering that the selling agent is obviously working for the vendor?
Yeah, look, I'm a big believer in open communication. A lot of the time, buyers don't want to tell the real estate agent exactly what their situation is, because they think the real estate agent will take advantage of them.
Yep.
And I think that you need to get to know the agents in the local area and go to the open homes and then make the assessment as to how they treat you. And then if you trust them, then be genuine with, don't put all your cards on the table, but be genuine about what you are trying to achieve and communicate with them.
So what should you hold back? Should you hold back the price that you're willing to go to, your stretch value,
Look, I think you've got to, unfortunately, I wish I could say it's the same answer for every single transaction, but it's really not.
Yep.
Because each vendor is in a different situation. So I would be trying to understand what the vendor's motivation was.
Yep.
If sometimes the agents might not tell you, but often they will. If you are showing genuine interest and you are being a genuine, authentic person, then you're more likely to get that level of communication back from the agent.
Mm-hmm. Great.
The real estate agent is quite unique in the way that they're remunerated, because for most people they get paid for their time, whereas a real estate agent gets paid for their results.
Yeah.
If someone was listening to this and they just did not understand real estate agent industry, what's the 101 that you would explain so that a buyer could better understand A, how a real estate agent gets paid, and B, then better understand why the real estate agent is motivated towards the vendor outcome more than the buyer outcome?
Well, they are paid by the vendor is the person that pays them. That's just the reality of it. And so that's why I think the move towards buyer's agents that we've only seen relatively recently in Australia, I think is a really, it's good for both sides of the transaction to be represented. That makes sense, right? But a lot of people are not prepared to invest in that. And so they do need to deal with the seller's agent. And they do, there are two different ways that real estate agents get paid. Some are on commission only. And so that means if they don't sell a property, they don't get paid. Others are on what's called debit credit, so they get a base salary, but it's not very much money. It's about $60,000 a year, and they have to pay that $60,000 back through the commissions that they generate by selling property.
Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, 60,000 would be quite enticing. But
it's below the average. It is below the average wage in Australia, and it is. You have to work. You have to work very long hours. And the interesting thing, I know there's a lot of people that come to me wanting to get into the industry, and they say, I bought a property and it was a terrible experience for me, and so I think I can do it better. And so people just don't understand how hard it is. It really is a tough gig being a real estate agent. You're dealing with people's biggest asset. You're dealing with people usually at their most stressful time. Sometimes people are selling property for happy reasons, but often they're not. And people sometimes are buying for happy reasons, but often are not. And so everybody is under stress, and it's really, it's a tough gig.
Leanne, do you think that real estate agents might fall into a bit of a hole during the current COVID environment, given that the income that they earn in April or May is largely from the efforts from 3-4 months ago, meaning listing, prospecting, getting to someone's lounge room, then going through the campaign, then getting it sold, and then once it settles, they get paid later. So their income now is a reflection of before, whereas they're probably all of their activities in April and May are largely going to get paid in June and July, where they might slip through some of the government's safety nets. Is that something that's front of mind for you in your role?
Absolutely is. Yeah, it is certainly something that we are we're talking to government about and trying to make them understand how our business works. But the other thing to remember for real estate, particularly, I'm speaking from a New South Wales context, but certainly real estate in general in Australia at the beginning of last year was pretty average, right? We had come off a very, very tough market, and the market only improved when Scott Morrison unexpectedly got voted in May. And so if we need to be 30% down on business of the 1st of March last year, then we're going to be broke, right? Like that, it was a really bad time for us. So it is, it's very difficult for the agents to be justifying their involvement in JobKeeper. And you're right, the agents are actually still getting paid at the moment. Here we are in April, and May is okay for a lot of them as well. But come June, July and August, where transaction numbers are really dropping dramatically, it's going to be tough. And we are certainly the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, and I'm pretty confident the institutes around the country are all doing the same thing. We are lobbying government for a 75% decrease in stamp duty, because certainly in New South Wales, median price, it depends on which publication you read, it's somewhere between 800 and $1 million. But let's just say it's $1 million for ease of numbers. That's a $40,000 stamp duty impost. Now, if we can get a dramatic decrease, then you're going to have buyers actually, instead of waiting, they're going to go, you know what, that's a lot of money. Let's actually make that buying decision now. And so hopefully that will help.
Yeah, it's been long argued, hasn't it, Leanne, that stamp duty is an inhibitor of movement, people movement. Doubt. That's totally true. It's effectively a non-productive tax, but unfortunately, in all states and territories, it's usually their second or third biggest revenue source, and that's obviously the challenge, right? Most of our wonderful governments have a thirst for spending on everything, and so to cover that off or to find that shortfall somewhere with all of the services that they want to offer around is that sort of very challenging question.
Yeah, but I would argue that when you reduce, like as you well know, people used to move about every 7 years. Now it's closer to every 12 years. And that a big reason is because of the stamp duty costs involved. And so if you reduce stamp duty, people are going to move more frequently. That's just the reality of it.
So what we're saying there is we'll pick up a volume increase,
correct,
which will cover some of that shortfall, or maybe, who knows, maybe all of that shortfall in terms of that people mobility. And it's the same sort of thing when you get congestion in big cities, like people in the northern side of Sydney won't work down in Miranda or somewhere like that because it's just the commute's too long. There's no lifestyle benefit for doing that. So you don't have that mobility. Whereas if you've got your dream job down, the coast or up the coast or wherever it is, you're going to be, challenged by the impact, on you financially, because yes, that $40,000 is dead money. It it pays for the fireworks at New Year's Eve. You know, it's Sydney, but it doesn't do very much else other than that in terms of what we do, right?
And of course, you know, the state government, whenever we try and lobby about stamp duty, you know, the government's all about, oh, real estate agents are greedy, we just want more transactions. Well, yeah, of course, you know, we're in business to make money. But there are so many businesses that hang off the back of a real estate transaction. You know, there's conveyancers, there's mortgage brokers, there's property stylists, there's pest and building inspections, and then when people move into new homes, they buy white goods, they renovate. It just goes on and on and on. It's actually really, really good for the economy to have a volume transactions.
Has there been any studies on that? Have we had the Deloitte or the KPMG boys and girls onto that in terms of you know, looking at that dollar? I mean, I've heard something like for every $1 in property, there's $10 generated for the economy. That came out of a NAB economist once before. But have we got any research on that? Because I'd love to.
No, we haven't, but I'm making a note, Ben. I'm going to get right onto that.
Yeah,
it's
something in there.
Yeah, we actually had the conversation last week because we're lobbying, we as in the Royal We, the Real Estate Institute, we're lobbying around a few things at the moment, and that was one of the things that I did ask. And yeah, I hadn't thought about going to KPMG or somebody like that, but they that could be. I think it is really, really important. There are a couple of states around the country that have dropped stamp duty and seen an increase in transaction numbers. So there is some evidence. I mean, obviously in the ACT, they have changed their land tax. That is not popular. So I certainly don't want to be spruiking a broad-based land tax. That is not a good idea. But yeah, I'll see if I can. We might talk offline about how we can find out a bit more.
Sounds like a plan. That economic benefit in terms of direct and indirect, I think would be substantial, given that, as we talked about before, it's the number one asset class in the country, representing around $7 trillion. So I think from that point of view, there is a material opportunity there that could be explored. Which is sort of a nice little segue into the current situation that we're in. And I know, Bryce and I have been keen to get all of the leaders of all of the associations around the country on to talk about the impact in the markets. And obviously, Leanne, as the president of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, you are responsible for the biggest property market in the country from an estate agency point of view. And circling back to what we were talking about before in terms of the selling agent. Now we want to focus in on the property manager. Yeah. They have obviously been experiencing probably one of the toughest times in terms of their situation. So just take us through, what has happened in New South Wales based on, was it Scott Morrison, I think it was the 26th or the 29th of March, where he basically did the right thing by just letting calmness come in terms of no one's going to be kicked out of their properties. But that led to a chain of events, and what's then happened in New South Wales?
Yeah, I mean, I'm loath to criticise the government because I think they have had just it's unbelievable what they've had to deal with, and I think by and large they've done a great job in an impossible situation. Yep. But unfortunately, the language that was used, saying there will be no evictions for 6 months, what a lot of tenants heard was we won't pay rent for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so that didn't just cause problems for the landlords, it also caused problems for the property managers and of course for the business owners, because as we know, the real estate agents get paid as the rent, they take a percentage commission of the rent as it goes through. And so all my business owners are ringing me going, Lee, that if they stop paying rent, we're going to be out of business. I mean, I had, without any exaggeration, I had suicidal business owners on the phone. I had property managers unable to cope with the verbal abuse they were getting. And the thing that really frustrated me was, instead of spending our time helping people that are in genuine hardship that we want to desperately help, we were dealing with opportunistic tenants who had no loss. I mean, there's a lot of people making a lot of money right now, right? Because some businesses are going strong. And we had one that emailed and said, we're not going to pay rent for 6 months, so don't even bother trying to communicate. And by the way, we're getting a dog. And it's like, honestly, like that is just, anyway. And
well, that's a key message, isn't it, Leanne? What you just said. I think it's worth pausing and sort of amplifying that the fact that there are some, because you could face criticism from certain quarters if you're being seen to only be sticking up for the landlords and sticking up for the property owners. But really, your message is don't be opportunistic, because there are some genuine people who are incredibly vulnerable, and we can't find them because the opportunists are getting in the way.
Correct, because they're much louder, right? The people that are in desperate hardship, some of them are embarrassed, they're uncomfortable, they're just they're depressed, they're in a really awful situation, but the opportunistic ones are the loud ones. And so we were madly lobbying government behind the scenes to say, please come out and say that that the tenants will have to pay rent. There is an obligation to pay rent. And I got frustrated with the tenants union. We were on a call with all of the stakeholders, with government, and the guy from the tenants union, who sounds like a really reasonable man, said, yeah, we know that the tenants are going to have to pay rent. And I said, oh, hallelujah, thank you. Can you come out and tell your members that that's the case? And he said, oh no, I don't want to confuse the situation. I'm like, are you for real? Anyway, so we got word from government. They still weren't coming out loudly about it, but I did a video that I sent to all of our members, to the tenants, saying very clearly what their obligations were. And I also then did one for landlords to be clear on what their obligations were. And of course, I got into trouble from the tenants union because I didn't tell the landlords that they had to negotiate in good faith. And I didn't tell the landlords that if they chose to waive rather than defer the rent, that they could. So I, like the good girl that I am, went and redid a video on Monday, in fact, and sent that out so that there was clarity, because I didn't want to be seen to be misleading anybody. But yeah, the messages have been difficult, and of course commercially, that there's been a whole lot of grief going on commercially as well.
Mm-hmm. So, as a property owner and property investor, what should I be expecting from my property manager in these times, in terms of the changes in the law, which is that if the tenant does make an approach, that they have to negotiate in good faith. So let's walk through that in terms of if I'm a property owner and my tenant's requested a review of my rent, what's the legal approach in New South Wales?
So in New South Wales, the tenant needs to be able to demonstrate that they have been impacted by 25% or more. Their household income has to be impacted by 25% or more after you take into account any JobKeeper or job seeker payments.
And how do they do that? How do they demonstrate that, Leanne? Just to get down into the weeds. What do they have to do? Do they have to show a pay slip? Do they tell us?
So the government has not been clear on exactly what is legally required, but what we're saying, so we at the REI has a hardship form that we've given to our members, and I'm happy to provide a copy of it for you if you would like, so that the tenants can fill in and supply all of the documentation that will demonstrate that they have been impacted. And what we would say is to any tenants is, you want the landlord to negotiate in good faith. So you, as a tenant, also need to negotiate in good faith and demonstrate that you have actually suffered a loss. And so that being the case, then the government is sort of saying guidelines that tenants shouldn't really be expected to pay any more than 30% of their income for rent. Landlords, if they are paying land tax, can get a 25% assistance. But, as we know, 84% of landlords don't pay land tax.
No, not in New South Wales, that's right.
No, so it's difficult. We do know that Parliament's been recalled in New South Wales on the 11th of May, and we know that the opposition are not happy with the assistance that has been provided. They are saying the assistance provided to landlords and tenants, but potentially I think they're looking at doing a hardship payment, something like they've done in Queensland.
Yep.
So we need to obviously, and we are talking to government, not just the government, but all of the different parties. We're talking to everybody this week about just making sure that payment makes its way to the landlord via the agent.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of critical points there. I mean,
yep.
for me, the 25% reduction in income is not necessarily a hardship measure. In my view, it should have been 50% for the household, because one of the things that's not being discussed here, and the only state that I've seen that come up is in Victoria, where they have to prove, when you are talking about hardship and potentially failure of payment, you've got to have a $5,000.
Yes.
So I think that's really important, because the bit that the politicians aren't answering, and the question that I would have to all politicians are, you could have a 25% reduction in income.
Yep.
That tenant could have $100,000 in savings.
Yep.
So what sort of hardship is that for them, considering that the non-payment of rent could push the landlord into a cash flow crisis, which then means that they have to do a payment holiday with their bank, which puts them into thousands of dollars of additional interest.
Tens of thousands of dollars in most cases.
In some cases in New South Wales, because obviously the mortgages are significantly higher than around the rest of Australia. So, so my view around that is, if we have some type of policy that sort of says your household is a combination of current cash flow but also asset, and if you've got liquid assets in cash, then you should be. That's exactly why you had an emergency fund for unintended events, unplanned events. That's why your money can help you during these times. I feel that it is a little opportunistic for a tenant to sort of say, well, yeah, but that's my deposit for my home, and I get that, and I appreciate that, and it's through no fault of your own that you're in this situation.
But it's not the landlord's fault either.
Correct. And
we're not there to provide social housing. It drives me nuts. We're investors, just like share market investors, just like investors in anything else. We've made the decision to invest in property for our future and for our family's future. And I
think you highlight a really good point there, in terms of that future is about not leaning on the government. That future is about self-funding that retirement. So that money that would be paid as a pension is no longer paid, because you've built an asset base as an aspiring Australian to self-fund your retirement, that you're not going to be impacted on that. So I think, we obviously, sing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to that type of stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a very good point. We are about the savings in Victoria. I am going to spend some time today just having a look at the measures around the country, so that we're better placed to really lobby hard when we're speaking to government tomorrow.
Well, that was going to be my next question, to see how you felt that the New South Wales response was compared to the rest of Australia, because we had Antonia Mercarella with us last week, and she was in a huge battle last week, which thankfully has largely been resolved for her. But the fact that you have a hardship form, that they weren't necessarily required to prove hardship.
No.
Did you find that hardship form was actually beneficial for your outcome, to try and weed out the opportunists? Because as soon as you have to demonstrate that, well, then clearly those who are trying to put the hand up for something that they're not entitled to would have just naturally fallen off, right?
Yep, absolutely. It was very helpful for our property managers. And we found we're doing a survey of our members at the moment, just to try and get some data, so we can get some clarity as to the volume of rent that has had to be discounted, and just to be able to put some numbers around all of this. But certainly there was a massive drop-off in applications once we provided that hardship form. And I would have to say that whilst the outcome for landlords is not what I would hope it to be yet, certainly the outcome in New South Wales was better than in a lot of other places initially, and that was due to a lot of hard work and a lot of current and previous REI NSW board members speaking to all of their contacts. It's really brought home to me the importance of relationships, because when you've got a good relationship, when the government or the regulator trusts you, it's a massively different conversation. And so that those relationships were really brought home in the result that we did actually achieve in New South Wales in the first instance, because we were all very scared that the government was just going to help the tenants out and not have them pay any rent or apply a discount, which would then be terrible for the landlords and also terrible for the industry as well.
Oh, Leanne, I think you make a really valid point there, and I think it also stems to the fact that we hope that the regulators and the governments of the day have learnt a lot, because really most landlords, most property investors are the silent Australians, right? They just go about their day. They don't have any uniformity. They don't have any voice. We're obviously trying to build that through the PICA Association, non-for-profit that was set up there. But by way of example, it's the Tenancy Union in New South Wales. They get $11 million per annum. Yep. So taxpayers' money to help them have a voice, plus the 2.5 million bonus money that they got as part of their relief package. Now, I'm not begrudging them that.
No.
That's, I think there is absolutely reasons in terms of tenants should absolutely know their rights. They're entering into a contract, but we get nothing, not $1 of support. So when we do see an issue, that's when we need to respond. And that's where ultimately, galvanising the numbers of property owners and getting them onto a database, which is really what PIC is trying to do, working with the associations around Australia in terms of getting that communication out there. Because the result that we got in Queensland was exactly, they did hear our, all of a sudden the property owners, the 2.5 million investors around the country did react, and they did show that this was too far. It wasn't fair. And we're looking for a win-win outcome, not necessarily a win-loss outcome, which, through the haste of having to make quick decisions, we probably got that balance incorrect.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I certainly also agree that tenants do need somewhere where they can go to be clear on their rights. And we all need tenants. You can't be a landlord if you don't have a tenant. And the thing that I get upset about is the fact that tenants are being pitted against their landlords and their agents. It doesn't need to be that way.
Yes.
We are all in this together, as we keep hearing. But the tone of some of the communication coming from the tenants, which is unfortunately also coming from the tenants union, is very aggressive. It's very antagonistic. And I just don't think that's the way to get the best outcome for anybody.
Yeah, we talked about it last week that we think that, we are starting to have this antagonistic relationship, and it should, as you say, it should not be that way. No. But you can understand potentially some of the people inside these tenancy associations. They hear constant negative stories from tenants who aren't being treated, because let's be honest, there are some ordinary landlords out there. There are some greedy landlords out there. So that it's that 5% on both sides that is spoiling it for the 95% who on both sides are trying to do the right thing here. And so you can understand that their bias could be skewed to all of these negative calls that they're getting online. But this is not healthy. This is not about a progressive relationship that we want to continue on. And then we also see government policy being, more aggressive to one party than the other, and all of a sudden becomes a bum fight. And it's just not going to be productive for a harmonious relationship with both parties.
No, I couldn't agree more. I don't know how we can. Positively impact it, but I'm certainly up for giving it a red hot crack.
Well, I think there's, we want to open dialogue with the tenancy associations. We want them to understand from our point of view exactly what our fears and frustrations are. The same way we want to understand from them what their fears and frustrations are, and how we can then educate the landlords that, hey, that's just not acceptable. that, doing that is just not acceptable, or doing this is acceptable, or whatever that looks like, as opposed to, again, regulating for that 5% who have a loud voice, but don't necessarily constitute the views of, if we did a survey of landlords tenants across the country, most of them would say, it's pretty good. The house was good. They kept it tidy. I had quiet enjoyment. Nothing to see here when something went wrong. They got it fixed. But obviously the ones who don't have that quiet enjoyment are the ones we're hearing from, and we're regulating to that. And that is, that's the perils of the pathway that we're going down, not only in New South Wales, but right across the country.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hey, Leanne, earlier you said you've been in the industry for 4 decades, so that means you would have seen the boom in the 80s, the recession we had to have in the 90s, you would have seen the introduction of GST, you would have seen September 11, you would have seen lots of epidemics
the vendor
across
tax.
the country. You've seen a lot, right, in that time.
Yeah.
What's your take on property pre-COVID? During COVID, but probably more importantly, I'm interested in your view on how you think the fundamentals of, I guess in your case, New South Wales real estate will stack up on the other side. But if you've got a view broadly across the country, I'd love to hear it.
Well, certainly in New South Wales on the 23rd of March was really when COVID, it became clear that all hell was about to break loose, right? But at the same time, in New South Wales, we had the Residential Tenancies Act implemented, and we also had the changes to our education and training reforms. And that was something that I have been working towards for more than 10 years. It's the reason I joined the board of the Real Estate Institute in the first place. I love real estate. I love real estate agents. Some of my best friends and certainly most of my family are in the industry, but I've had a long-held belief that it's been too easy for a long time to get into the industry. And we had situations in New South Wales where you could go and get your licence. You could do it in a month or a month and a bit, and then you could open a business without ever working in a real estate business before. And to become a salesperson, it was just too quick to maintain your CPD requirements. You could literally do it. We had someone do it in 3.5 minutes online. And so I have been, and it's because of that. And people look at us and think, oh, it's an easy way to make a buck. I'm going to get in. Then they realise that it's not actually an easy way to make a buck. They have to then behave in a way that a professional agent wouldn't behave just to put food on their table. And so the whole thing has just seen a spiral downhill since the good old days when I first became licensed, because it took me, I can't remember, 4 years to become a valuer, and then another couple of years after that to become a licensed agent. So it was a lot.
It's a tough way to make a quick buck, because real estate agent is about having a positive mindset. It's being able to accept rejection. It's being able to understand that you have to work today without any guarantee of earning an income. It's all about building relationships, all about building. I would say anyone who thinks going into real estate is for a quick buck is grossly misinformed.
I completely agree with you. But you know what it's like, right? People just see the version of it that they see.
The nice suits, the fancy cars,
European cars.
Yep.
We get paid a car allowance, people. That's why we all have flash cars.
They always say, don't compare someone's highlights reel to what's really going on behind the scenes, right?
It's totally. Social media, I have to cringe when some of the social media stuff I see from agents. I absolutely cringe. And certainly in New South Wales, we've been pushing for these education and training reforms, which have finally happened. But we're also pushing towards becoming a recognised profession, which would actually add a layer on top of those reforms, because it is such an important role that we play in people's lives, whether we're managing their assets or we're buying and selling their assets for them. And I think we need to be held to a much higher standard. And I get infuriated when I see agents behaving badly, because I know there are some terrible real estate agents that will do whatever they have to do to get a deal done. And I don't want them in our industry. So I think on the way out, at the end of this, we will have less people in the industry. There'll be less businesses. There'll be less salespeople. But the people who are there, because, you know, I talk to real estate agents every day, and they're in two camps. They're either taking a bit of a holiday, spending time with the kids, nothing wrong with that. That's, you know, that nothing wrong with that. But there's others that are really trying to be of service in their community. They're communicating with people, not trying to buy and sell property, but just communicating, saying, okay, this is what's going on in the world for us. What's going on for you? How can I help? I'm here if you need me. And it's really interesting to see the different ways that people approach. But certainly where we sit today, much more positive feeling out there in the market than there has been in recent weeks, which is a relief.
What about as the asset class in particular? Do you talked about we as investors earlier, so which would indicate that you're a property investor yourself.
Certainly am.
How do you feel about the underlying asset in New South Wales? Would you buy now? And importantly, what are you seeing once the restrictions are relaxed and everyone starts going back to the movie? Well, it's probably a little premature, but when normal life starts to slowly come back, what would be your observations, and what would you be saying to folks who are thinking? Because the big question is, should we invest now or should we wait? Ben and I have got a view, but I'd be interested in yours.
I'll be interested in yours too. So my view is that I had confirmation from my mortgage broker yesterday that I'm in a position to buy an investment property. And so, yes, I'm actively looking right now. Mm-hmm. Will I be price sensitive? Absolutely, I will. And so I won't jump. I don't need to jump because I'm buying an investment. But yes, I'm actively looking. I am hearing from agents across the state that they have a lot of stock lined up for September. Now, obviously, we always know spring is a popular time to be buying and or to be selling. So I don't know, but I think there's a big chance that we're going to come out of this hard and fast. We in New South Wales we're in a really strong market right up until a few weeks ago. We have had clearance rates of the mid-70s to even over 80% for most of this year. Certainly that's backed off now, and as you would expect, there are people that are just, consumer sentiment, uncertainty. When things are uncertain, people don't make big decisions, and buying and selling is a big decision. But just based on what I'm hearing, there's a lot of underlying demand out there to move. So I think that we're going to see quite a lot of activity coming. And I think if we manage to get that change to the stamp duty, that's going to have a really positive impact. Tell me, what do you guys think?
Yeah, we tend to agree. I mean, we've got a buyers team that is buying real estate across the country, right? So we're actually seeing opportunistic price point, as you said, but we feel that it'll come back to equilibrium, like pre-COVID would come back pretty quickly, largely on the back of low listings, pent-up demand, and the fact that we aren't building enough houses to cater for the amount of people that are coming here. But we've said it a couple of times on the podcast, and I'd be interested in your feedback on the analogy, but kind of describing it like a car, where the engine, the engine's fully tuned, i.e. cash rate at 0.25, not likely to go any lower, best competitive interest rates you can ever get. So the engine's been oil and grease up, fully tuned, ready to go. Then you've got the government at the back of the car with the Bowser just pumping the car full of fuel because, stimulus package, job keepers, pay as you go, like there's just money being blown into the economy. But the problem is the driver can't get in the car. And because if the driver could get in the car, there's plenty of fuel and the engine's primed, ready to go. But we kind of feel like on the other side that once the driver can get back in, we're not necessarily saying that property is going to fly, but we are of the view that it's very hard to make a case that in the right locations, A grade stock, not C grade stock. In A grade stock, how is it not reasonable to suggest that once we're on the other side that it will at the very least return back to where we were pre-COVID? And then if you've got less listings, more demand, and more people wanting it, how that doesn't put a little bit of a nudge on upward pressure on prices in the right areas. But on the flip side of that, we've preached on this podcast for 5 years now that asset selection is critical. So, and we're only talking about assets that we would consider investment grade, A grade assets, high owner occupier appeal that's got some uniqueness about them. But on the other side, I think C grade stock definitely, but some B minus stock will be challenged as well, because people are looking at their balance sheets now going, which can I liquidate and no one's liquidating the A-grade stuff. They're liquidating the junk stock, and therefore there'll be lots of that on the market, and that'll put downward pressure on the prices.
Yeah, we are hearing some of our landlords have been, taken particularly the self-funded retirees have taken a pretty big hit on the stock market. All of us that invest in shares have. And of course, we know that's going to come back as well. So we don't really want to sell any of our shares right now. So some of our landlords are sort of in a position where they need to liquidate properties, which is unfortunate. But it's just, the market. It's just the market we're in right now. But yeah, the clearance rates we were experiencing pre-COVID were, they were just really, really strong. So there's no reason to believe, as you said, with the interest rates the way they are, there's no reason to believe that that's not going to come back relatively quickly.
So I think that the test for us, because ultimately we're seeing demand and supply influence price in all aspects of this COVID period. Medical supplies ridiculously price gouging and all of that sort of stuff going on because of supply and demand issues. So the question I have is around, have you had any indication from the New South Wales government in terms of when we will be able to get back to open homes and potentially public auctions at this stage?
No, not at all yet. Certainly, the Premier indicated about a week ago that she would have an announcement at the end of April. So that's next week about what's happening with the shutdowns. She's come out and said schools third week of term, which is another couple of weeks away.
Yep.
The kids can go back 1 day a week, so they'll have about 20% of the kids at the school any one day. But that's about as far as we've heard. So we expect to hear from her next week on that. But I don't think we're going to be back to open homes anytime. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon.
So, in terms of the predictions that I have about what's going to happen in the market, one of the assumptions that I do make, because I am a believer that the September stock supply will be higher. But I would be thinking that we would have some type of open home possibility and potentially even public auctions with social distancing. But I suspect that there will be a very strict regime in terms of number of people in the property at any one time, those types of things. Now, if we get back to that level, then my confidence of a stronger rebound in prices will be validated. If we get to a stage where there's still, we have a second phase of a second wave, then of course that's going to have a detrimental effect, and that's obviously going to impact the mobility of people and hence the productivity of people and hence their incomes and unemployment and so forth. So if all going well, the next couple of months we're going to get some results on treatments and also vaccinations, early indications on those. Those programs are now rolling out. My understanding is there's over 60 treatment and vaccinations going around the world. So those types of things will be critical in terms of confidence for governments to be able to let their people, socialise and some mobility of those people as we improve the mortality rate. And I think that will continue to happen. So all going well, and I'm with you, Leanne, I'm buying at the moment as well. So I'm good to go for another property. So I think from that point of view, that's the people who are in the industry basically saying that we prefer to buy under less competition.
Yes, exactly.
Than buying when there's a lot more competition, because we know price movement isn't necessarily the result of supply; it's the result of strong demand.
Correct.
And we know that there will be limited supply there, so you still got to hand pick, as Bryce was saying. Steer clear of the rubbish stock that's out there. But I think what we will see in terms of the price results for that rubbish stock is that's going to have an impact on median values, and that's going to be great media fodder in terms of the headlines. But the fundamentals, and in speaking to you and listening to all of the other industry people around the country, and we're well networked in that space, is that there is a quiet optimism in the real estate circles in terms of I've still got quality buyers. I've still got sellers who want to upgrade, downgrade, or do whatever. So I think that's being lost in the media noise because I go to the source of the market, which is the people on the ground.
It's not an interesting story though for the media, is it? That's the problem. They like drama.
No, well, it's not easy to put into a soundbite, right?
No,
Whereas,
exactly.
property prices down 10% is good for a media soundbite, and we get a little bit of criticism from that, from the 5% of people who go, oh, this is the worst thing ever, and this is the worst time. But a lot of the human psychology and behavioural economics always points to we normally are over anxious in difficult times, but also over optimistic when things are booming, and we have, that's why we have peaks and troughs in cycles, and we have sentiment movements. So it's an interesting time, and time will tell. But if we lift our eyes 24, 36 months from now, where do you see us? Where do you see us post-COVID in 2 to 3 years from now?
God, where's my crystal ball? I mean, how can you even think about predicting that far out? But certainly I'm a believer in property. I think that the fundamentals for property, particularly where I am in Sydney, always going to be good. Yes, there's going to be ups and downs, but I will be continuing to invest in property because that's where I get strong capital growth and good I've got very low vacancies in the properties that I have. So that's what I'm going to continue to do. But I'm not going to give you a price prediction. It's just going to keep going up, my friend.
Well, I think that's the point. I mean, when you put into context of your assumptions, and the assumptions I have for the next 18 months is we'll have a vaccine. Now,
really?
If we have a vaccine inside 18 months, then those assumptions then become quite strong in terms of being able to then forecast mobility, productivity, employment, historically low interest rates, which means asset appreciation is historically performed, not just in Australia, but globally. That's what I'm sort of talking about. So even though, for a coronavirus, we haven't had that vaccine,
no,
in terms of mobility and treatment. So if we're sort of saying it's 18 months and we've got all these, brilliant minds working on a solution, that's my view in terms of the property prices in 3 to 5 years will be significantly higher than they are today, post that vaccine and basically people, getting back to normal mobility and normal life.
Well, I hope you're right. I'll look forward to that vaccine. I'm gonna diarise 18 months from today and check.
Yeah, Ben, that's Ben's view. It's not the Property Couch's view. But hey, you've been very generous with your time. The last one for me, Leanne, is you started off in the family business. I think you said you lasted 8 years. You're now successfully juggling a business as well as a role representing the peak body for your industry, which juggling those two things in this time is just props to you. But once we get through this, what's the next agenda item that you would like to pursue as the president of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that I've actually been thinking about in the last few days. Certainly our focus in New South Wales has been firmly on the training and education reforms for a really long time, because even after we actually got them through Parliament, we couldn't get them implemented through government because we had a minister who was too fond of the dodgy agent media bite and didn't want to do anything productive to weed out the dodgy agents like we did. Certainly, we are going to work hard on the pathway to professionalism, because I just passionately believe it's the way the industry needs to go. It's a very difficult road, much more difficult than we expected. But that doesn't mean when we're going to stop. And this is my personal view. This is not something I've discussed with anybody else on the board. But there's been so much going on around the country that's so inconsistent. I really think that we need to. I know we've tried to have a national legislation and national qualifications and stuff before, and from what I could see, egos wouldn't allow that to happen. And I don't know how others feel about that, but it is something I'm certainly going to explore with other people around the country, because it's been a massive. If we all had the same rules, it would have made it so much easier for everybody, right?
Well, that NOLA attempt back in the day,
Yes.
Leanne, in terms of the COAG doing that, it really did disappoint me, of the same view, right? You know,
Yep.
we've got licenses in, 4 of the 8 locations around the country. The compliance costs, the red tape,
Crazy.
it's ridiculous that we, and as a country of 25 million people, even also having different land titles across such a small population base, it just makes
no sense.
Absolutely no sense at all. So I hope.
Well, there's a great lesson there. Sorry to just before we move on, Ben. There's a great lesson there for folks. Like when someone says, "How's property going to go in Australia?" If you even in the weeds, we can't even get the states and territories to have a regulation. Like you've got different ways to transact real estate in Western Australia than in New South Wales.
Yeah.
So just that alone should help people land the fact that we are micro markets, sub-markets within sub-markets within sub-markets. And if anyone says, what's property going to do in Australia? You're asking the wrong question. It's way too broad.
Totally. And even asking what property is going to do in Sydney.
Yeah.
You know, there are dozens and dozens of different markets and different market conditions in Sydney, and they don't all react the same way at the same time. So it's particularly when a market's moving, it might be moving in the eastern suburbs one direction, but in the western suburbs it's doing something else. And so it's very hard. And so when you have a look at the, at auction clearance rates, I know the media loves auction clearance rates, but let's be honest, that's only a percentage of the market. It only tells part of the story. So yeah, it's very hard to get any one indicator that gives you a really good picture.
And Leanne, finally, in terms of tenancy reform, as you said, that legislation has passed. What's your view on some of those legislative changes, and is there anything that we still want to see adjusted, moving forward in legislation?
Yeah. Look, we at the institute had something like 65,000 words of reports that we sent to government. Some of what we advocated, they implemented. Some didn't. I think the the domestic violence situation, that's complicated, and we absolutely do want to be able to help people in domestic violence situations. But again, I had a situation yesterday when somebody is using a domestic violence, an AVO that was taken out a year ago against somebody who's currently in jail, and the person's moved 150 miles away from where they used to live, and they're using that old AVO to break a lease. Now, it's like, I don't know. I just think that some of these things just need to be finessed a little bit.
Yep. I mean, you were fortunate enough, in terms of New South Wales, around the no reason clause for the 90-day termination. That to me is the real concern. It's going to, for what's
that was hard to get to. Let me tell you, we really had to fight hard for that. Well,
it's sensible, right? Because what now is the risk of happening in Victoria and also in Queensland is, tenancy leases could go for 4 years, 5 years, right? So that could be the standard, and not everyone wants a 5-year or a 4-year lease, but ultimately under the new arrangements whereby, that first period, if that first period of the lease lapses, that tenant effectively has control of that property for the rest of their lives. Now, we feel that, again, the answer is somewhere in the middle. That's putting extremities to one end when the owner of the asset basically isn't in control of their own asset. That does not quite. So again, as you mentioned before, we aren't in the business of social housing. No. Social housing should be provided by governments. It's always been their mantra. But because they've abandoned that and we do it more efficiently, but all of a sudden now the attention's turning on, the poor so-called greedy property investor who's then being impacted by that. So we feel that, Queensland's coming into that space right now. Well, let's just say that we can galvanise those property owners again with concerns around that particular policy. So we just feel that, thankfully New South Wales has set a precedent for that to be changed, and we hope Queensland will follow suit with you. And then we'll come back to Victoria and say, look, it's just not practical policy, and these are the unintended consequences of the policy. which you haven't seen because you didn't ask us for our input. You basically went to the tenancy association and said, what do you want? That's disappointing.
And that's been such a massive lesson for me in my time. This is my second term as president of the Institute in New South Wales. And my big lesson is that, the unintended consequences from government decisions, absolutely massive. And so it's incredibly important that we all work really hard to have positive, productive relationships with government and regulators, which is sometimes easier said than done. But it's really, really important, because if they trust us and trust that we're not just trying to get everything our way, because
Correct.
we're not. We
No.
need to have a balance for it to work effectively for everybody.
Yep. I think well said.
Yeah.
Hey, Leanne, we've really enjoyed having you on the Property Couch. You've provided some wisdom from clearly over a number of decades for real estate in general, but clearly given us an update on what's happening on the ground in New South Wales with respect to the environment we face ourselves in. So Ben and I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure our audience will really appreciate the insights. So good luck navigating the next couple of months with your own business and within your role as the president. And thanks for coming on the Property Couch.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Well, Ben, what I love about our position is, we clearly have an opportunity through this podcast, is to share information out to our community. But how good is it being at the front row to having conversations with folks like Leanne that are just thought leaders, really articulate, really intelligent around a lot of stuff, but in this case, clearly around real estate, and real estate specifically in New South Wales.
Yeah, it just bodes well for my confidence in terms of, when we come out of this crisis, what the market looks like, and getting an insider's look in terms of the agent side. So when we're asking questions about the how an agent performs and what their challenges are and all that, we get a greater insight and appreciation in terms of what they're doing. But what I did like was the optimism associated with what's happening out there. So we've moved from panic to a calmer state, and I think from that point of view, we will see the fruits of that start to play out as we come out of our current mobility restrictions. So I'm quietly optimistic, as I always am, Bryce, in terms of where we see, and Leanne and the team at the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales and all the professional agents out there are ready for that, or are preparing for what that looks like. So it's going to be good times for all. Hopefully once we get into a more normal way of life.
Yep. So thanks again, Leanne. We certainly appreciated your time, and we had a really, really great chat with you, which I'm sure our listeners will get a lot of information, a lot of benefit from. So, hey Ben, my life hack today is I want to just encourage people. At the beginning, I gave a Zig Ziglar quote around the fact that we all have 24 hours, so it's a lack of direction, not a lack of time, that's the problem. And I've sort of been thinking, because you and I are both hungry for more information, hungry for learning. And what I wanted to plant the seed with our community is you just got to take opportune times to slot in learning. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, as do you, as do a lot of our listeners. But I watch a lot of courses, but I fit them in when I'm doing other things. So I'll give you an example. I often have, when the kids go down to bed, Ben, I'm tidying up the house or going through the kitchen or doing the dishes or whatever it is. I usually have an iPhone or an iPad up on the windowsill near the kitchen. I have my AirPods in, and I'm happy to take that 15, 20-minute chunk of a course, of a podcast, of some form of material, using that time that actually distracts me from the fact that I'm doing a chore, and it just puts the forefront that I'm actually doing something to feed my mind, feed my brain. Oh, and by the way, at the same time, I put the bins out, and the kitchen got tidy or whatever it is that I was doing. So we often think that consuming information is the old school. You sit at the window with your book open, the fire's going, Ben, you're looking at the window, it's a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. But I want to encourage everyone to know that we've got to take these opportunities to feed our mind, because I wonder, the personal development and growth for me is really about one thing: upgrading my thinking. And I'm always keen to upgrade my thinking, Ben, so I'm looking for those opportunity times to seize the opportunity in the small moments, because everyone's really busy and not many people have an opportunity to go, all right, I'm going to sit down for 3 hours and read a book or watch a course or listen to some content or whatever it is. So that's my life hack today, Ben.
Mate, you'll be finding me out there mowing the lawns with the headphones in, so I concur with that beautifully. Now, did you know, Bryce?
Did you know
today? Just
hey?
a little quick one today.
Oh.
Yeah, look, just thought I'd talk about supply side of the property market today. Just a little quick one. So again, good friends of CoreLogic once again giving us some insightful data here. But up until basically Easter Sunday, we've seen advertised sales, because remember there's still plenty of little off-market stuff going on as well, as we've talked about. But advertised stock on market across Australia, 24,051 properties for the last 28 days to Easter Sunday. So that's the data. Now, that represents a fall on year listings of 27.3%. So people are following what we said, Bryce, which is if you don't need to sell right now, you don't sell right now. And, so normally you would see stock around 30,000, in this sort of timeline for a normal year. So that stock is obviously has been reduced. So be careful with what you're looking at, and just remember, from our point of view, there is a clear difference between investment grade and investment stock. So the investment grade stuff is hard to find at the moment. So don't be seduced by something that's really cheap, because it's really cheap for a reason. Stay clear of that particular asset type. So there it is. Just supply side, 27% decline in stock on market. So sales listings in the last 28 days. So people are hibernating their properties, Bryce.
Hey, Ben, I just want to quickly add to that during the week we had the brains trust of our full property advisory planning team together, and the conversation was, I was part of that. There's a lot of intellectual horsepower in that discussion, and part of it was around looking under the bonnet of a particular client's circumstances, Ben, and they're for no fault of their own, they're in a challenging situation right now, but they had 9 investment properties. And what was really clear in that discussion, Ben, was when we're going around the grounds for all the advisors as to what they should do in terms of a workshop and a brainstorm, no one actually said, they should get rid of the A properties because they clearly perform, Ben. What they were saying is, look at that stuff that they've owned since 2012 and hasn't even done 1% compounding in that time. One was 0.87% compounding during that time. Rarely were any of these properties more than 2% compounding during that time. So what is interesting, Ben, is during a pandemic that we're going through now, people are looking at portfolios and they're not getting rid of investment grade properties that are in good suburbs or in good locations that serve a very good owner-occupier community. They're looking at getting rid of the junk stock. So I thought that was a nice little anecdote that sort of feeds into what you were saying earlier, that now is when Warren Buffett said, when the tide is out, you see who's been swimming naked. That can sound like a platitude, but now the tide is out. You can actually have a little look to see, that wasn't a good decision, that wasn't a good decision. Yep. And it all comes back to asset selection at the front. So very good. Did you know? Thank you for that, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed that today with Leanne Pilkington as much as Ben and I did, Ben. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, folks.
Hey there folks, Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.